dying to feed the public? Activists say that poultry workers in the United States are being put at unnecessary risk during the pandemic. Hi, I'm Femi OK. Today on The Stream, we discuss the hardships these labourers face and ask who will help them. You can join in the stream. As always, you can tweet us at AJStream and also jump into the live comments on the YouTube chat and be part of today's show. The coronavirus has put thousands of poultry processing workers across the United States in a horrible predicament. Risk their health by continuing to work or lose their job. A few months into the pandemic, I joined up with Al Jazeera's fault lines to find out what was happening to these essential workers, risking their lives to feed America. Have a look.
The management there, they care more about the pieces of meat going in the tray than they care about their team members, and that became very evident this year.
If you could conjure a perfect incubator for a virus like COVID-19, a meatpacking plant is a great example.
Que ellos empezaron a preocuparse, pero no nos decían en realidad qué era lo que estaba pasando.
Joining us to discuss the difficulties many poultry workers are currently facing in Virginia, Lakeisha Bailey, who you just saw in that clip. She is a former poultry plant employee. In Arkansas, Magali Licoli, she's the co-founder and director of Venceremos. That's a food chain workers alliance. And in Washington, D.C., Dave Moraskin, he's an attorney and the legislative director at Public Justice Food Project. He also is featured in the Fault Lines documentary. Hello, everybody. It's really good to have you. I have a theory, Magali. Most people have no idea what goes on in a poultry processing plant. How would you like to enlighten them?
Well, I mean, working in a processing plant is definitely a very dangerous and difficult job for workers. Here in Arkansas, most of the workers come from Latin America. Most of them are refugees and Asian or Black communities that work in this plant. So prior to the pandemic, the conditions were already difficult for most of these workers. I've been organizing workers around the high amount of chemicals used in these plants. So whenever we saw the pandemic coming, we knew that these workers were very vulnerable to COVID-19 because of the long life respiratory issues that they have faced by working with these chemicals. And so when we saw the outbreaks happening across the country, we knew that it was just a matter of time of us experiencing this here. And it's because of the lack of, the workers are not allowed to practice social distancing. Workers work shoulder to shoulder, as we saw in the documentary, and it's so impossible for workers to practice this. And so that's why many of them got sick, because the company was not protecting them. They don't have basic leave. They don't have any of the essential protections that the other workers may have. These workers were lacking that. So that's why COVID-19 hit so hard in this industry.
Keisha, what was that like, that moment when COVID started spreading through the poultry plants where you lived? And you knew workers, and you initially were working there at the beginning of COVID-19. What was that like? What did it feel like? How ready were you?
It was very scary, I must say. And generally, I have never felt like that working for Tyson, where I ever felt like my safety was ever in fear, or fear of my safety or at risk. And for our numbers to skyrocket for this little area the way that they did, that was very alarming. It was a fear that was set here that we never imagined. And we all know this is unprecedented times, but the fact that our numbers were rising higher than the higher populated areas in Virginia was very, very, very scary. And the nervousness, just seeing the fear on everyone's faces coming into work while I was still there before I took a stance to leave, I'd never felt anything like that. And like I mentioned, I have 5 years experience working with Tyson, and by far this year was the most fear for my safety I've ever experienced.
Dave, what would be scary about poultry processing during COVID-19? What are those particular conditions like that workers would be scared to come to work?
The answer is basically everything would be terrifying about poultry processing during COVID-19. As the video you showed highlighted, these are really incubators for the spread, that you have people working shoulder to shoulder in the hallways, on the line, 8 hours a day, if not more, 6 days a week. And it was months before they got masks. While the rest of the country was sheltering in place, these people were going to work every day and putting their lives on the line. They were told they didn't even need masks until 2 months into the pandemic. And these companies just don't have an interest in their employees. We represent a family who, during the first few months of the pandemic, was working in a facility. The mother in the family who worked at this facility went to the nurse who's on the property and said, I feel sick, I have a fever, I have a cough, I'm aching. She was told, oh, no, it's a cold. Go back to the line, go back to work. She brought COVID home, infected her daughter. Her daughter was pregnant. Both ended up in the hospital. The mother died. The daughter gave birth while she was on a ventilator via a C-section. And this is what's going on in these plants during the pandemic.
I want to show you something here on my laptop. This is the title of today's show. And it said, did workers die to keep food on America's tables? I want you to hear some workers that I spoke to as I was doing the reporting on the Fault Lines documentary. And they explained those first few months. So we're looking at March, April, May, what it was like to work. What did they know? What were they told? Have a look.
Bueno, cuando empezó el COVID no se les proveyó mascarilla, no se les tomaba la temperatura.
Pienso que el problema que había era que no había suficientes pruebas para hacerse o tardaba tiempo para hacerse.
¿Qué era el virus? ¿Cómo se transmitía? ¿Cómo te podías proteger? Nunca hubo esa plática hacia los trabajadores.
So, Keisha, let me put this to you. Did workers die to keep food on America's table? Stark question. The answer is what?
Absolutely yes.
Why is that even acceptable?
That it's unacceptable. It's truly unacceptable, because that just makes us feel like that our lives are disposable, and we are essential, but we're not disposable. And I knew one of the poultry workers from one of our plants here. She was from the Purdue plant. I knew her. She was a very nice lady. She got along with everybody. She didn't have a bad bone in her body, and that was devastating. When I heard that she was still going to work carrying symptoms, she already had pre-existing conditions, and just the fact on how hearing that they treated her, and literally when she got off from work, she died as soon as she got home.
All right.
And I think the important thing to emphasize is Keisha's absolutely right that workers died. This was not necessary to keep food on America's tables. There's this theory out there that we were about to experience a meat shortage. We weren't. We could have continued to have meat on the tables. We could have continued to have other food on the tables. This was a decision to put profits for these companies over these workers' lives. This was totally unnecessary for the American consumer.
And also the companies really purposely expose workers to get sick. One of the things that we also experience here in Arkansas, and besides the stories, all the stories are really similar by state and by companies, And one of the things that workers were very desperate about was the lack of transparency. The company was not letting them know if they were at risk of being close to someone who got tested positive. We saw a correlation or collaboration with the Department of Health that were not reporting cases. They were not telling workers if they were at risk. So really, poultry workers were treated different than the rest of the workers from other industries, because if they were going to put workers in quarantine and let them know that they were at risk, the plants would be forced to shut down. And precisely that's why the plants didn't want to shut down. So they kept the information away from workers. And that's why the companies purposely put workers at risk of getting sick, because they didn't know the dangers of working closely with people that were coming sick already every day.
So, Guess, I want to put some of the comments that are happening on YouTube to you, and you can respond immediately to them. So, Candice says, I have no choice but to work as a single mother in a high-risk environment because no one else will feed us. My children beg me to stay home. I have no choice. Candice is obviously a meat packing processor. Nina Jones says on YouTube, several people I know work at Tyson. There is no distancing. The problem is people need food and they produce prices and those prices are going up, etc. Dave, can you respond to that? People need food. So there's no social distancing because people need food. I want to show people some of the undercover video that we got from Arkansas, and this is how close people are working together. So one of the workers there was really kind to us at Fault Lines and took a big risk. So let's play that video so we can see how closely people are working together. Dave, is there a choice here? Do these workers have to put their life on the line because they need to feed America? They've got to produce all this chicken, Dave.
There's absolutely no need for workers to be this close. What can happen is that the lines can be slowed down and then workers can be spaced apart. The less meat goes through the line at any given time, the more workers can space because they have more room to make the cuts. They have more room to do their project without being close to someone else who needs to do the next step in the processing. What you're hearing about the need for food is entirely a creation of, one, the industry and its marketing side, and two, the Trump administration. That this was an effort by the Trump administration to justify basically a gift to the industry, that it was going to issue an order saying that the meatpacking plants were essential because food was at risk. And the meatpacking plants were then going to be able to leverage that to try to keep workers in place. It's important to know that A, the government does not have that power. It can't actually force meatpacking plants to stay open. And B, that's a myth. We have tons of food, literally, in what's known as cold storage. And that can be accessed. The amount that's being processed, there's actually less need right now because we're exporting less, because the rest of the world's also experiencing this pandemic. This is all a myth that's meant to ensure that we keep on producing at the same levels so the companies can profit regardless of the impact on the workers, who could be saved simply by some minor changes that would allow the production to continue while the workers could be safe.
I'm going to be really honest here. I'll come back to you, Magali and Keisha, in just a moment. I'm going to be really honest here. It has been very difficult to get hold of either the lobbyists who work for the poultry industry or the companies themselves. Statements or totally ghosting. We did get some statements from Tyson Foods, and I'm going to share that with you in response to us saying, will you come and be on this programme? But in the conversation, as we were trying to make the Fault Lines documentary, I had a back and forth with Derek Burleson. He works with PR for Tyson Foods. And eventually, after weeks of trying to get an interview, the interview didn't happen. But I did find Derek talking about the safety precautions that Tyson Foods is taking during COVID-19. Have a look. This is from YouTube.
Before the start of every shift, team members' temperatures are taken with this walk-through temperature scanner. If their fever is 100.4 or greater, then a nurse takes another temporal scan. If that fever is still 100.4 or greater, that team member is sent home. This area is where our team members are also provided their required facial coverings, their masks for their work every single day. Also, they can take one from this area at the end of the day to go home. As you go into the plant floor inside of our facilities, you see there are some instances where social distancing is naturally occurring. In other areas, there are workstation dividers where team members are working closely together. You'll also see the required use of facial coverings, and in some cases, the plastic visors covering our team members' face.
So Derek did send a very long statement for us to share with you during this program. Obviously, I can't share the entire statement with you, but something that jumped out at us. Our top priority is the health and safety of our workers, and we've implemented a host of protective measures at our facilities that meet or exceed CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and OSHA, which is the Labor Department for the United States, guidance for preventing COVID-19. So Tyson Foods are saying, we are proudly doing this for our workers. Lakeisha, you say what?
Absolutely not. I mean, they might be doing that now, but they should have started that when the first case was reported in each plant. Not wait until after a little bit of heat and attention is drawn about safety concerns. But you're going to start doing this after the cases have already reached over at least 50% of the plant population. And from my understanding, currently, Tyson has gone right back to normal operations as if COVID-19 never hit.
What does that mean? What does normal operations mean, Lakeisha?
They're not doing any more testing on site, from my understanding. As for the temperature checks, some team members are still a little bit leery about their temperatures and how they're checking them. The line speeds have raised. They have been working 6 days a week. It's just like nothing ever happened.
I'm going to put this to you, Magali. Maria says the problem is workers in the US have zero protections. The deregulation frenzy of the Trump administration has made this situation more precarious. Is this about politics, or is this about the companies being so big, so powerful, they can do whatever they want?
Yeah, the meat companies have so much power in the government. They've been able to lobbying to reduce benefits such as workers' comp for years. They've been able to increase the line speed. And during the pandemic, the line speed increased to 174 birds per minute. And that was quietly done by the USDA in these companies. And so yeah, I think that everything that you're saying, Tyson was putting a lot of money in PR campaign, because we were organizing over 300 workers in this processing plant where they made this video, and they were lying. And we know that whenever there's cameras or journalists coming to record inside the plant, everything is slowed down, everything is cleaned. They pretty much stage everything so it looks nice to people that are not really familiar to this. So the company has been lying about how they are protecting workers. It's pretty much protecting themselves, because they see these workers are sacrificial as disposable, and these workers been working the whole pandemic just to keep the profits running. And that's what we saw, that in April of this year, 130,000 pounds of meat were exported to China. So they were never essential to keep the supply.
So just so make sure that people are following this. Exported, so not a shortage, even though we're in a global pandemic, exported. There was something that I really want to show you, because this clarifies it, as well as Fortline's documentary. AJ Labs put together a digital version of the documentary and picked out some really big points here. So in 2019, the US produced at least 9 billion chickens, which sold for $100 billion. This is a massive industry. Is it possible, Dave, with so much money at stake, to make any improvements for the workers? The workers are actually doing the work, taking the risks.
Can I interject real quick, Femke?
Yeah, Lakeisha, go ahead. What did you say?
I would just like to say, with those numbers right there, I believe it was fiscal year 19. Tyson can actually afford to put more safety measures in place for their team members. If the top 5 executives for Tyson, if their salaries are grossing $35 million combined, there should be no excuse to why the bonuses that they gave out the team members back in April to make them satisfied and to make them keep coming to work, they shouldn't have been taxed. A lot of team members didn't even receive that $500 bonus. They only received maybe half of it or a quarter of it. And the catch was you had to work 90 straight consecutive days in order to receive a bonus for working in a pandemic, which is insane to me. And there are so many people not only putting themselves in jeopardy going to work in the pandemic, I was putting my mother in jeopardy working during the pandemic for Tyson. She was diagnosed with pulmonary sarcoidosis the beginning of March, and she had lost a total of 50 pounds at least. And when her doctor told me, hey, if you keep continuing to go to work, you cannot be your mother's caretaker. And I'm her only child. So just imagine carrying that weight, on top of me also being a single parent of 2 children.
Keisha, Keisha, I'm just thinking here about where we go from here, because people like yourself are organising, Magali is organising, Dave is bringing the law to actually make companies make the change here. There's something I really wanted to share with you, and this is Tom, who is thinking about whenever there's the next big economic package for workers during COVID-19, he's thinking positively about the poultry workers and what may happen to them. Let's have a listen to Tom.
Altogether, about 3 in 4 undocumented workers are actually in jobs the federal government itself recognizes as essential to the critical infrastructure of this country. But despite this, undocumented workers and even their U.S. citizen family members have been left out of most of the relief provided by Congress over the last 8 months. In 2021, the next administration and Congress will have to enact a national recovery package that protects American families, promotes public health, and gets this economy back on track. For that recovery to be as dynamic and durable as it needs to be, and as inclusive and equitable as it ought to be, it has to include a path to citizenship for those individuals and their families who have done the work to keep us safe and who will keep doing the work to help us rebuild stronger and better than ever.
Tom brings some positivity to this conversation. He's saying that there is hope and this is what needs to happen. Dave?
Well, I think what you're hearing throughout this entire discussion is, to your question about is this political or is it corporate, the answer is yes, it's both. And what we need to do is when that package gets passed, we have to make sure that the agencies who are administering it aren't captured. We represent another group of workers, this time in Pennsylvania, who wrote a letter to OSHA, what you referred to as the Department of Labor for workers. And they said, we're not being given masks. We're not being allowed to space on the line. We are in constant fear of a repeat. There was already an outbreak. We're in constant fear of a repeat of an outbreak. And they wrote to OSHA, and OSHA did nothing. And why did OSHA do nothing? Because the regional office said, well, they still are allowed to bring masks. And maybe it's not possible to space. And why was the regional office thinking that way? Because when the CDC wrote its original report on what meatpacking plants should do, it gave some very clear guidelines. Right. Space workers, give masks. But then the companies intervened and got CDC to pull back that report.
Dave, in a sentence, we're at the end of this show. This conversation, it will go on. We will revisit it, I promise you. In a sentence, are you hopeful?
I had to be hopeful because it needs to get better. So
I hear that sigh. I hear that deep, deep sigh. Dave, Keisha, Magali, thank you so much. Also, lots of thanks happening on YouTube for you. They're saying thank you for bringing the voice of the voiceless. America's forgotten about this story months ago. As Keisha said, no one is disposable. Keisha, your words are resonating. Magali, your words are resonating. Dave, thank you very much indeed. All right, this is time to wrap up this conversation that we're having on TV, but I'm taking it over on Instagram. So in 30 minutes, if you're watching the live show, on the AJ Stream Instagram account, I'm going to be chatting to Suzanne Adderley. She's the co-director for the Food Chain Workers Alliance. If you're not available right now, just go to the AJ Stream Instagram account, click on the IDTV button, and you will find that conversation still there. And then one more thing that I do definitely have to tell you, and that is about the Fault Lines documentary. Let me just pull it up here on my laptop. Virus on the Poultry Line. You can find it at aljazeera.com, also running on Al Jazeera TV. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.